finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Well, today's episode is quite intense. It's quite heavy. You know, life is fun, and sometimes it's devastating. And in today's episode, we're going to interview Dr. Marcy Larson and talk about one of the hardest things you can ever go through as a human being.
Yeah, a little heads up about Marcy and her story. Actually, we met her because her husband is a fellow member of the Doctor Podcast Network, Dr. Eric Larson, who we've interviewed. And so she is a pediatrician and mother of 3 biological children and 1 foster child. She's really passionate about caring for children and families. And her husband lost their son, Andy. And it was that passion that inspired her to create a weekly podcast called Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. And the show offers healing and hope to bereaved parents and those who support them. On her grief journey, she has spoken to well over 100 grieving parents. And she's really learned a lot about grief. And she's so precious to share what she's learned and that knowledge with others and try to make the journey a little less difficult. So you'll get to hear all about that journey in just a moment. But first, we got to pay some bills, which is a word from our sponsor today, who is Advice Media. Make no mistake, digital marketing is a science, and Advice Media has created a proven roadmap that gets you from where your practice is now to where you want it to be. They call this their pyramid of success. Thousands of clients have proven that their 6-stage approach is the optimal way for attracting new patients and retaining current ones. We get it. You're busy and don't have the time to be a digital marketing expert. You have lives to change. Just give them 30 minutes to consult with you. They would bet you are doing some things really, really well, and there might be areas where you can improve. That's where they come in. Just for spending the time, they will give you a $60 Amazon gift card. You have nothing to lose. So book your consult today and go to drpodcastnetwork.com/advice media, and that's drpodcastnetwork.com/advice media.
Okay, now. All right, today we have Dr. Marcy Larson, who is a general pediatrician in Michigan. Marcy and her family had the unfortunate experience of losing a child. One of the hardest things, if you look at the life change scale, the hardest thing for any human to experience in a single event is the loss of a child. This inspired Marcy to start her podcast. She was like, I'm grieving. I don't know where to go. There must be a podcast on parental loss when you lose a child. And there wasn't. So she started one. So Marcy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so as you said, I am a pediatrician. I grew up in Iowa, actually, and trained at the University of Iowa for medical school and residency, where I met my husband, Eric. And we decided to move to Michigan after we finished our training because Eric was from here. So we kind of wanted to move and be close to his family because we had just kind of started our family. So we had our first daughter, Catherine, when we were both second-year residents. I was in pediatrics and my husband's anesthesiology. And then I had just given birth to Andy, our second, when we were moving. And in fact, we had to give power of attorney over to Eric's parents to buy our house because I was 11 days after having Andy on the day of the house closing. So that wasn't going to happen. We weren't going to be traveling. And then we had another son, Peter, 2 years later. I always tell people we are on the 2-year plan, having a baby every 2 years. So that's what we did. And I actually came to Grand Rapids. I didn't even have a job. Eric had his anesthesiology job, and I thought Grand Rapids is a bigger, in a city that has lots of pediatrics practices, I'm sure I'll be able to find something. And sure enough, I did. So just after being here a few months, I was going to cover maternity leave for someone, and then they decided to never let me go. So I've been at the same practice now for 15 years.
Wow. That's amazing. So, why don't you, and actually we met basically you through Eric because we're both in the same podcast network. And what we were talking about earlier is that we came to find your family story through a fireside chat that Tim and I heard that was shared in our group about what happened to your family and losing Andy. And it touched us like to the core, the whole story about how what happened, his loss, but just how we as physicians and people in general just can't wrap our head around sometimes how to deal with people's loss, how to comfort them, what to say, what not to say. And do you mind sharing the story of Andy and what happened and what led you to where you're at?
Yeah. So, as I said, Andy was our middle kid. We had a work event actually at a minor league baseball game. So my whole office had rented a deck for the single A baseball team here in town, the West Michigan Whitecaps, and we were going to watch and get to eat as much food as we wanted, right? It's unlimited food, and my boys had actually fasted, I think, most of the day because they were going to be able to eat so much food at the Whitecaps game. And my daughter was actually working, so she wasn't going to be able to go. We also had my foster son, Valeriano, who was also working. So it was just the four of us going to this baseball game, and we were traveling along the freeway. It was very slow going. It always is right there before those baseball games start, but it was especially slow because it was summer and it was construction here in Michigan. And so people weren't traveling very fast, and we were over in the exit lane. And Eric thinks we were going maybe 15 or 20 mile an hour, and a woman came out of kind of nowhere, and a lot of people said that she was driving way too fast in what she should have been anyway, but she hit us going highway speeds. And I lost consciousness. Peter lost consciousness. Eric stayed conscious the whole time. Andy actually was killed instantly, but we didn't know that at the time. Eric pulled him out of the car, did CPR on him for a long time because, that's what he does, right? He resuscitates people. He saves people. He didn't think there would be any way he would lose him. But unfortunately he did. He had a medic there helping him. There was someone who had been, I think, stationed in Afghanistan as a medic. So he was right there with him the whole time. I mean, no way Andy could have gotten better care than from his dad and that team. And I came to, of course, by that time they had relieved Eric, trying to take over resuscitation on Andy and send him to be by me. And then I came to, and that's when I, realized what was happening. I turned and I saw them doing the CPR on Andy, and then I said to Eric, is he going to be okay? And at first Eric said yes. And then I think he thought better of it, and he said, I don't know. And I knew that meant no. Because really, they wouldn't have pulled him away if there'd have been much hope, right? Because he's the one that had the most training and the most experience and would have been able to do the best job. But unfortunately, he was killed instantly, and our lives were changed, just in an instant. Everything's going fine and great, and, I've been at this pediatrics practice for 14 plus years, and suddenly it's just everything has changed, right?
What I'm feeling is, I can't, this is me, but you're a pediatrician. Your husband is, that's what he does. He's in the OR. He's an anesthesiologist. He puts people to sleep. He saves them in the middle of a case. And when it's your own child, you are the people that should be able to help,
right,
and you're helpless, right, and it's your child. but you're injured. And, I don't know the extent of like what happened
Well,
with.
actually, that's what's so crazy too, is that we were not that injured. I mean, I lost consciousness, I think, for a little short period of time. More of it, I just don't have memory of. I think I was, Eric started talking to me and he thought I kind of knew what was going on because I had looked pretty awake. And Peter was only out for a very short period of time too. I mean, poor kid, he watched all of this happen in front of his eyes. But we all really walked away. Eric had a big cut on his forehead, still has a little scar, but none of the rest of us, broken bones, nothing, just a couple of bruises and some burns, and that's it. So that is hard in some ways, right? In some ways, I feel like I should be scarred on the outside too, and not just scarred on the inside, having experienced that.
I mean, I know me, it would just make me question like why and how and what are the odds and why, with my beliefs, like why did God, what's his plan? And like, I can't, all of those things. And just the weight of that. I mean, I know I could go on and just ask all kinds of things about it, but that's just heavy.
So just as reference, how long ago was that?
So it will be 3 years this coming August.
So it's really recent. I mean,
yes.
In the terms of kind of the emotional weight which is like geographic time,
Mm-hmm.
that is a very recent loss. I mean, this isn't like, like it was.
Although it's interesting you say that because other people kind of think you should be over it after a certain period of time, right? And they like, oh, aren't you doing better by now? And you some people, that number is like 6 months. Other people, it's like a year. Like you have passed a year, you should be kind of okay. But obviously that's not the case. And when you do experience big loss like that, you kind of realize how long it does go on. I mean, I remember going to our first grief support group, which we went to 3 weeks after Andy died. So we were like crazy early to a grief support group. But I remember the facilitator saying, I didn't feel like myself after my son died for 9 years. And that really freaked me out because like 9 years? I cannot feel like this for 9 years. I mean, I felt like I can't look ahead 3 hours. 9 years? But what she meant was she didn't feel like her normal self for 9 years. It didn't mean that she was stuck in that dark place for 9 years because it is a really dark place. And the idea of being there 9 years would have been horrific and certainly not what has turned out to be the case. Am I the same person I was before? Nope, absolutely not. But in many ways, I'm actually a better person than I was before. As much as you hate to say that, I have more compassion now than I did before. But you talk about immediate impact. Eric and I were very different in that a lot of people grieve differently anyway. But for Eric, after a few weeks, he needed to get back to the OR. He needed to get back to what he knew. And they sheltered him. They really did baby him quite a bit. They sent him just to a plastic surgery center. I think he went there for a month. He didn't do anything other than, nose jobs and tummy tucks. And I mean, that's like all he did for a month. But for me, that's why he thought I would need that too. Like, you just need to get back to the office because he didn't like the idea of me sitting at home alone, which was horrible. I mean, to sit alone, I would go into the room and cry and it would be horrible. But to go see kids in the office.
Right. I mean,
day.
His situation's different. He's got, probably mostly adults.
Yes. Well, in the plastic surgery center, it was all adults. Right? That's why they put him there. They put him there so he wouldn't have to see kids. I mean, the first time he had to intubate a kid and secure a kid's airway was actually difficult for him because he had not had to work on anyone's airway other than his son's, for a kid since that time. So, but for me, every day was seeing these families and getting the look, right? The people that knew you gave you the look of, oh my God, your kid is dead. Look, like they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to mention it. It's somehow like it's catchy. Like if I've talked to her about it, maybe then it's really admitting that this could happen, which means this could happen to me. And wow, I don't want her talking about it in front of my kids either, because then the kids are going to realize, wow, her kid died, I could die too. And so I think the families just did not know how to treat me at all. And also because, you know, you think of your pediatrician really almost as part of your family in some ways, right? You look to that person for advice. And I that's what I do. I give family advice to people, and they think a lot of me and what I'm thinking. And so it was hard for them. It was hard for them to see
Right.
me. Like
How
that.
how soon did you try to go back to work after
So
the accident?
Andy died on the 15th of August, and I went back probably the very beginning of October, so maybe about 6 weeks or so. And I made it through about the first week of November, and then I stopped because I was crying between every patient. I would pull it together, and I'd go in and I'd see a patient, and I'd, you know, get the look or whatever, but I'd plow through, and then I'd leave and I'd cry. And then I'd do it all up again and go see the next patient. And that's just not a way to live. It's not. And it was so draining because grief is hard work in and of itself. And then when I tried to be a physician on top of it, and then my brain was not even working right. You know, they kind of this joke about having grief brain. It's real. I mean, I couldn't come up with names of medications that I had known for years and that I prescribed all the time. I just couldn't come up with names of it. And then I would have to ask my nurse, like, I can't remember the name of this. And then, you know, now she's lacking confidence in my medical ability because I'm slipping up and not remembering names. And then that's making me panicked too, because I think, if I can't remember this name, what if I'm missing something else? Right? I don't want to miss something. So that also, I think, caused me to feel like I need to just take a step back. And fortunately, I was able to do that, and Eric was super supportive. And at the time, I was also doing, I was a medical director for a physician or a pediatric PO. So I was doing a little bit of that still, just to keep my mind a little bit busy. So I did that for a little while. But I stayed away from seeing patients for about a year, actually, after that. And really worked on myself and getting better. And, you know, for a while I thought I could never do it again. But then as you start to kind of heal, as I said before, I think I'm a better person now than I was, a more compassionate person. And there's no question I'm a better pediatrician now than I was before. Because when I first went back, when I tried to do that, you know, I would see somebody that would have a fever for 3 hours, and I'd think, why in the world are you here with a fever for 3 hours? Like, there's no reason you should go to the doctor when your kid has had a fever for 3 hours. But now I really honestly can look at that same patient and say, wow, that mom is really worried because this kid's only had a fever for 3 hours. What can I do to get her anxiety down or get dad's anxiety down? What can I do to help reassure this family that this fever for 3 hours is not horrible and it's not really the worst thing? And it's a completely different mindset than I had beforehand. I just think so much more into where their minds are, I think, at the time.
Right. Yeah, you can, I mean, because you can relate, because you get what their fears are. And so that's the issue, is to really just help these parents and know and reassure them. And, you know, it's not the giving them the medical info on the fever, and it's really understanding what their fears are, comforting them, that reassuring them, educating them, and knowing, you know, having them trust you and know that everything's going to be okay. But you've walked in their shoes, so to speak. And that really means more than their kid's fine. Trust me, I'm a doctor.
No,
Get
but
out.
It's amazing. I tell the story a lot about when we had our first child, our daughter, and I delivered hundreds of babies, and, you know, small town, rural medicine, took care of, you know, grandma and great grandma and the babies and the whole thing. It was really awesome. And so we finally have our own child. And, having given all this advice to people for, years and years, and then we get this child, we bring her home, she's all bundled up because it's the end of November. We put her down on the couch and we look at her, and I look at May and I go, what do we do with it now?
We just sit and we stare at each other and her, and we're like, what do we do?
Like,
and then I'm
I guess
like,
she'll
I get
tell
it.
us. I guess she'll make a noise, and then we need to respond to that. I mean, it was just so wild. And exactly, like all of these experiences, I mean, they either make you stronger and better, or they start to destroy you. Like, I mean, how many families, how many marriages have been destroyed because of a loss like this? I mean, lots. How many have been made stronger? Well, lots. And so kind of going in that vein, where you are a better pediatrician, and you think, and you as you testified, you're a better person. When we heard you speak about this before, we were really fascinated about what was really helpful for people to say and what was really unhelpful. And I think for a lot of our listeners, physicians and not, this is, I think, really great advice. So if you can kind of walk us through that would be awesome. Yeah,
there are so many things that people try to say to make you feel better, right? That's a lot of what we do as physicians, is we try to make people feel better physically. So now we're going to try, and just as people in general, try to make you feel better. If you are talking to a grieving person, no matter what you say, you are not going to make them feel better. It's not like suddenly you're going to have some revolutionary statement that's going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess it's really not that bad. Okay, even things like you had said, how is this part of God's plan? That when people said that to me, that, it's part of God's plan. And if it's someone that I knew well, I would say, well, God's plan sucks then. And I would just, if I didn't know them well, I didn't say much of anything, because I don't want to, because they'll freak out if you say something blasphemous like God's plan sucks. But it feels that way. Right now, for me, God's plan sucks. That may very well be the case. And maybe someday I will totally understand that. But that's not helpful. That is not a helpful statement at all. Because now, what did you just do? Now you made me feel like not only am I grieving and sad and feeling horrible that I'm missing my son, now I'm a bad Christian too. Because I don't think that God's plan is okay. So that means that now I'm a horrible Christian. So, all of those types of things like, oh, he's in a better place. Okay, for him, but does that make my life better right now? That he's in a better place? Not really, because I'm still missing him horribly. So just having someone sit with you, I'd say my very favorite thing people said to me in line at the funeral home was, I have no words for you. Because when they said I had no words for you, it's like, when you say something like that, it means I've thought about 5-6 different things I could say to you, and I realize that none of them are going to help you. But I want you to know that I really care, and I'm here for you. And that's what it meant to me, for me to get a hug, and I have no words for you. And just to be able to sit with you, to be able to do something, but not to say things that are trying to make you feel better. So many people just feel like this tremendous pressure that they have to say something that will make you feel better. But really, there isn't anything. The only things you can do are end up saying things that make you feel worse. So things like, I'm just so sorry. I'm so sorry. That's helpful. To offer to do something specific, that's helpful. So I know Eric, in the weeks after he went back to work, actually, there was a teenage boy who was killed. He was a neighbor to someone that Eric was working with, and he said, I just don't know what to do. My neighbor's teenage son just died, and I don't know what to do for him. I always used to see him out mowing the lawn. And Eric said, mow their lawn. Right? Because if you think about that neighbor, how hard is that going to be for somebody else to get out that lawnmower and mow the lawn? when it's used to be your son doing it? You don't want that. You don't even want to ask someone to mow your lawn. You just want it done. So if your neighbor came over with his mower, you didn't have to get out your mower, nothing, and just have the lawn mowed. I cannot even tell you how thankful that family would be, because there's no doubt they're thinking about the fact that, oh, I've got to do that. You know, shopping trips are really hard. I used to so appreciate it if I get a text from a friend saying, I'm going to Costco. What can I get for you today? Like, not, what do you want me to do? Because then I have to, like, come up with something. That's too hard. But it's not just, what can I get for you? It's specific. So now all I have to think about are a few things that I might need from Costco. And I can give a list of 3 things that I might need at Costco. And that did take a huge weight off of me, and something I now don't have to do. So those kind of tangible things, I think, are tremendous to be able to help someone.
Yeah, it's amazing. One of my best friends, almost to the day, lost his wife a year ago. Very, very sudden and unexpected. And, you know, the stuff that's just, you know, we've had lots of conversations about this, but the stuff that's just daunting is, you know, you still have to pay the bills. You still have to go to the bank. You still have to change the account, you know, names on the account. You still have to cancel the credit cards. You still have to, and, you know, May is the CEO of our house, and she does kind of all the background and the social media and so forth for our podcast. I'm more of the ideas person, so it makes a pretty good team. But I'm thinking, man, if something happened to her, I can't imagine what it would take just to do the pay the electric bill would be like unbelievably painful, because
you'd be in the dark more ways than one.
I probably would be. And you think of that, like, I just love them. It's so rich in metaphor, that mowing the lawn. You know, it's like we need to do less talking and more mowing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talked to a mom not too long ago, and she said after her daughter died, she realized she had to change the cat litter. And she's like, why do I still have to change the cat litter? Like, this should be something I shouldn't have to even think about anymore, right? I am worrying about burying my daughter, and she had a lot of legal stuff because there was it was just messy and horrible, and and she still had to just take out the cat litter. It just didn't seem right somehow.
Just the simple, I know what we've gone through in the last month. We went through, you know, our loss of our pet and Tim's mom at the same time, and it was a really rough 2 weeks. But even that, you're right. It was like simple day-to-day things. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't have any energy to deal with that mundane. Like, you're right. It's like I don't have the emotional or physical energy. So I think that, just people stepping up to the plate for those things that you just think of, well, you don't even think of, but it's really helpful. Did you have anybody in this time that you ran into or knew that had gone through a similar loss? I mean, I think you mentioned going to grief support, but was there anybody that had gone through something and then had some, I don't know, that could obviously understand what you guys were going through, have words that were helpful? Was there anything positive that worked?
My good friend Michelle had not, we didn't know anyone who had lost a child. No one. But my good friend Michelle, when she was younger, her younger sister died, and then her older sister also had cancer. So they lived in an area that they think it was some sort of pollutant type of thing, because many children in their neighborhood got cancer. So anyway, she was the only healthy one, with one dying and the other one. And then the older sister ended up dying as an adult. And then her mother died too. So all that was left then was her and her dad. So both sisters and mom were gone. So I felt like she sort of got me a little bit more. You know, she did understand more than the average person. So that was helpful. It was really helpful in those first days. She kind of became our media person, because obviously a death like this makes all the local news, right?
Yeah, right.
Our pictures were on there. My picture was on there from the website. It was, a lot of news because we had his funeral on what should have been his first day of high school. And he was head chorister for the Grand Rapids Choir of Men and Boys, so he had this fantastic voice, and they put that on TV. I mean, it was good TV for a week or so. But we had a woman from our church who worked at one of the TV stations, and in fact, she was there that morning. The next morning, they said there's this news story, and they said Andy Larson, and she completely broke down because we had just had dinner with them just a few days before. But she was quick to call our pastor and say, you need to tell them to get a spokesperson for the family so that the media aren't bugging them. And so Michelle was that. She was our spokesperson. She was the one who was talking to the police in those early days. She was the one that arranged to get stuff out of the car. She's the one that helped the meals. I mean, people brought us meals until December, actually. We had a GoFundMe page so I wouldn't have to clean my house for 6 months. It was, she did a lot of that kind of stuff. She wrote down everything anybody brought to the house. And when that she had the list all made out, and then she gave it to my sister-in-law, and my sister-in-law said, I felt so much pressure because I had to fill out this form, and if I did it wrong, I was going to get in trouble. So that, I think, was that was helpful that she kind of got that. And my sister-in-law, too, was actually really a true blessing. So I didn't say this before, but when I was in college, my mother died. So my mother died when I was in college. My younger brother was still in high school, actually. And he ended up marrying this sweet, wonderful woman, Lori, who lost her dad when she was a teen as well. So they both had lost their parents as teenagers. And so that was helpful for us, for Eric and I, because that, the two of them could be there in the sadness and in the darkness a little bit easier than, say, Eric's family could be, right? Because they could just be, I think, more okay with it. We could go there for Thanksgiving, and I didn't really feel like I was ruining anybody's Thanksgiving because they just kind of got that it was just going to be hard, and they were okay with it.
Was there anybody at work, I'm curious, from like colleagues or just nursing staff for either you or Eric when you initially went back to work, or when you did again, or when he's there, that was really helpful or not helpful, or things that happened that sort of stand out? Or
yeah, I mean, you don't want to. Certainly they were helpful and they wanted the best for us, right? But it's also hard for them to really understand. Like, I went back to work in November, and we, of course, had our office Christmas party. And like I had told you, Andy died going to an office event. So I was doing better, right? I was back at work. And, of course, everyone expected me to go to the Christmas party. I wasn't going to the Christmas party. There's no way I was going to the Christmas party.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, why aren't you going to the Christmas party? I said, I don't really want to. And I got, why? You're doing so well.
Oh, wow.
And it's just one of those things that, like, my good friend Stephanie says, just because I carry it well doesn't mean it isn't heavy.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's wonderful.
This is still really, really heavy. And going to a Christmas party is way more than I can possibly handle. So I don't think they realize that I wasn't just okay. And that's hard. It's such a hard balance because you want to be your happy, bubbly Dr. Larson that kids love to come and see. But on the other hand, then you don't want people to think, well, I'm totally fine, because I'm not totally fine. And the tears are always just below the surface, right? Anything can still set me off. Little things can set me off. It's amazing to me because my office will forget, and they will, like not too long ago, they put a car accident follow-up on my schedule. Like, that I can't do. I can't see a teenager who was just in a car accident and let out of the hospital. Like, I don't think about that those types of things would be really, really difficult for me. You know, I had somebody that they were going to put in, a 14-year-old who was obsessing about death, and I was supposed to talk to them about not obsessing about death. How do I do that when my 14-year-old boy did die? I can't, right? So there are some things that are still just too tricky, and as time goes on, people don't really remember because their lives weren't changed just 100% like mine was. On the outside, I seem a lot the same, but so much of me is different. And I just think it's hard for people to remember. And it's not their fault. It's not, but it can be a challenge.
No, it's amazing to me because I've said this, I don't know how many times to patients. I said, look, you're never going to get over this, but you will get through it. Because the idea that somehow you could get over the loss of your son or somebody that's been married, like my parents, married for 65 years, that you're just going to get over the loss of your husband. Well, it cheapens the relationship. It in my view. I mean, this idea that, okay, well, I'll just get over it. It was a goldfish. Well, no, of course you're not. I mean, the relationship is so deep and so meaningful. It has to change you forever because the relationship changed you forever when you became his mother.
Right. I guess what I'm thinking is people who haven't gone through that their experience is different because it's like, yeah, they've been there to comfort you, attended a funeral, it's on their mind for a couple of weeks and their life goes back to normal. And then, yeah, it's like they literally forget. Life goes on and then, they might encounter you in 6 months and it's just like, okay, life's going on. Okay, Marcy, what, and it's like, oh yeah, crap. This is what she lives with. This is her life. Yeah. It's so different from the other person because they're not living it.
Right. And that's always the thing. You talk to people that have had significant losses and it's always, 2-3 months later when they're just starting to recognize, okay, this is the way it's going to be forever now. Mm-hmm. And that's when everyone else forgets about it. That's when the cards and the calls.
I think my low point was 6 months, actually. I think that was my low. Was 6 months later. That's when the numbness really was starting to wear off, and I was really feeling like this is forever, and this is what it's going to be. And you're right. By 6 months, nobody's really remembering much anymore. I mean, they're not. The meals don't come anymore. Nobody asks you how you're doing. Maybe if you're lucky, they'll remember on a birthday or an anniversary, but that's really going to be it. So that's when you end up starting to turn to other people who have really gone through loss to be able to turn to them. And for me, it was probably 9 months after Andy died that I really started thinking I need to try to find something to help me. And as you had said earlier, maybe you didn't, but my husband Eric has a podcast. And I was listening to it before Andy died, and then I wasn't even really listening to that. I didn't really even listen to podcasts, but all of a sudden I'm like, okay, reading a book is too hard. People gave me 1 million books. We had a stack of 20 books or more. We had 7 copies of the book called A Lament for a Son.
Oh, my gosh.
7 copies, which is a lovely book, but, it can take a lot to be able to read a book. So I thought, I am going to listen to a podcast on grief. There's a podcast on everything, right? So I'm looking, and there are a couple kind of on grief, and then I'm like, well, I really need one on parent grief, grieving a child. So I'm going through, and I can find nothing. And then Eric gets home, and I said, oh, I've been looking for a podcast on child loss, and I don't think there is one. And he was like, you're crazy. There has to be one. And so he starts looking, and sure enough, there wasn't one. And I don't even know where this came from, but I said out loud to Eric, which was a mistake, I think I'm meant to do one. And of course, he jumps all over it because he has podcasts.
Yes, of course.
He's into podcasts. He listens to podcasts. Like, yes, absolutely. You totally need to do this. And then I'm like, why did I say that out loud? I don't know anything
what just
about
happened
this at all. Right. What did I just commit to here? And sure enough, we just kind of started working on it a little bit and the idea and, making a web page and doing all this stuff. And next thing you know, I've started a podcast. And I really needed to do that to kind of give people a platform to be able to talk about their child in some ways. That's what it's really come to. It's come to this, like, people can come on and they can tell their story and talk to me for an hour about their child and their grief journey. Because in general, the average person does not want to hear it. They don't want to hear you talking about your dead kid. It makes people feel uncomfortable. Please do not talk about your dead kid. You talk about your living ones, fine. Do not talk about the one who died. And now these men and women get to tell their story to other bereaved parents who want to listen. They want to know. They want to hear their stories, and they want to hear, you know what? Maybe I'm not crazy. Because you do feel like you're going crazy, and there's no question. When I was not coming up with names of medications, I thought I was losing my mind. I mean, I went to my therapist, and I said one day, I think I'm going crazy. And I was hesitant to say it because I'm thinking they're going to put me in the mental hospital, right? Because I really am losing my mind. And she just came back and said, you're not going crazy. You're absolutely not going crazy. I did a whole episode on you're not going crazy because you really feel that way. And so I've had so many parents reach out and say, it just feels so nice to know that I'm not alone. And all of these feelings that I thought I couldn't talk to anybody about, you're just talking about it. And you're feeling it, and you're saying it's okay. And these other parents are feeling the same feelings that I am. And we're suddenly in community with each other. And when you're in community like that, that's when the healing really starts. And so it's funny. I started the podcast. I released in September, and those same news stations that, had all the stories about Andy, they picked up my story about my podcast too, which was nice because
Perfect.
It gave me a nice little platform to start off of that I wouldn't have had normally, right? So we got a little press that way. But that started in September, and I went back to work in November because it was that healing to me. And I felt like those days, so I work 3 days a week, and then the other 2 days a week, I was doing my podcast, and I was doing it with Andy, and I was working on my grief. And I had like a place to put my grief. I had a purpose for my grief. I had something to do, with the grief to help these parents. And then since that time, so, that's been a big mission of mine. Since then, I started to think, wow, doctors, we're really not trained very well in this. We do not know what we're doing. We don't know what to talk to people about. Like, I had no idea. I felt like I was thinking back to patients that I had who had died and what I thought and was totally wrong, right? I mean, I thought back to a family I'd known and I'd cared for in the peds ICU on and off for like a year. So I knew them well. And the little girl died an hour and a half before I got there in the morning. And so I got there and she had died and we all took it hard, right? And I walked in the room and I'm thinking to myself, I got to keep it together. I got to keep it together. Don't cry. And I walk in and I see her holding her dead daughter. And I cried. And I hugged her and we had her daughter between us. And I hugged her and I remember her saying to me, you're going to be a great general pediatrician. And what I heard in my head was, you suck at this. You are crying. You shouldn't be doing this. You better be a general pediatrician because you certainly couldn't do this ICU stuff. Okay? But that's not what she meant. What she meant was, you care so much about your families. They're going to be blessed by having you as their doctor. And I did not know that until Andy died. I had thought for all of those years that I had done the wrong thing that day, and I hadn't. It had been the right thing the whole time. And so that, that just caused me to think about those other times and me and showing some emotion. Now, you don't want to be an emotional mess. I didn't want to fall apart and have the parents have to comfort me. I mean, I had that, right? I had other people that were crying after Andy died that I felt like I had to comfort them. And that's too much, right? You have to get your comfort from someone else. You can't get your comfort feel like you have to get your comfort from a bereaved person. But showing some humanity and showing that you care is not bad. That's a good thing, right? And I think about other patients that I had much later in my practice. She had a son who had died, and he had died shortly after I made it to my office. So I had never cared for him myself. I had seen him in the office. Other people had cared for him. And so when she became pregnant again with a little girl, she picked me as her pediatrician. I think really because I had not cared for him, and she did want somebody separate. But I never brought him up. And I'm so upset with myself for not doing that, because I should have. Instead, I'm thinking to myself, she picked me because I didn't know him. I shouldn't talk about him. We're just focusing on the little girl. That's wrong. I should have asked right away. And now I'm the one that takes families if they've lost a child, right? I'm the one. And in fact, I've told my office manager, if you have people that are coming in that had lost their first child, give them all to me. Like, I should have them all, because no one can quite understand what the anxiety and all the stress and all of that and what that does to someone. Not that they can't, and I shouldn't say that, because I don't want other people to be scared to take care of families who have lost children before, or take care of families who are in deep, deep grief, because it's important to be able to do that. But you just know that, bring them up, let them talk about it, let them, they don't just now have one child, they still have two, and they still want to talk about that other one. And now this new one, are they going to have increased anxiety and fears that this could happen again? Absolutely. Because we saw the world crash once, and that doesn't mean it's not going to crash again. So I don't know. I felt like that's what I need to work on now. So I'm still doing my podcast. I'm still working a lot with these bereaved parents. But I recently emailed somebody today, because I had a whole podcast with a woman, and her son's doctor is now at Johns Hopkins, but he was in Rochester, New York, and he was amazing to them. And I said, I think I need to interview him too, because we need to start talking a little bit about how he did that and how he can be amazing, and how it's important to be able to be there for these families as they're going through all of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. I mean, I found it interesting and amazing and great that, when you said that some things are still hard for you, like the car accident, someone who's having a follow-up from an MBA, but yet the families that have lost a child, to bring them on, because I can do that. And what a gift. I mean, that you're at that place that you can, that's, where you can speak to these people, you can comfort them because you've walked in their shoes, and that, some things are not okay yet, and that's okay, and they may never be. But this, I mean, you're at that place where this is what you're there for. And I mean, I think
I just feel that camaraderie with
Yeah.
people who are in the worst and have experienced the worst. The stuff that I have the harder time with is the ones that were almost me but weren't.
Right.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. You don't have to explain it. It's just, it is what it is, and you can, and you know what you can deal with, and you have that gift, and what you can't, and just amazing. So I know you have like 88 podcast episodes now. Is that right, or is it more?
That's more
I
now.
think I looked, but
I think I just released. I'm releasing 91 tomorrow.
Wow.
So, yeah, 91.
Congratulations. So do people, I guess, how do they find, why don't you share, I know how to find it, but why don't you share how to find your podcast, or if people want to get a hold of you? I know you have a webpage and a Facebook group, right?
Yeah.
For families.
Yeah. So my website is andysmom.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter as Always Andy's Mom. I now even have a YouTube channel, Always Andy's Mom YouTube channel. The podcast is called Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. But if you put in Always Andy's Mom, it should come up too on Apple podcasts or whatever. But Eric said I needed to put the losing a child in there so people would know what it's about. So that's in there at the beginning. Losing a child, always Andy's mom. And on that podcast, I told you I talked to bereaved parents, but I also talked to some expert in the field. So we do different topic discussions as well. So that's like that one that I said, you're not going crazy. Last week we did one on meaning making, which was probably one of my very favorite, on how you can put purpose and growth after going through tragedy, and how you can, and most of the time do, even become a better person. Gwen, who I talked to, said she thinks 90% of bereaved people do end up coming out feeling like they're better people. Now 10% kind of stay stuck, and that's a fear certainly that we have, but that doesn't mean you're over it. Like you had said earlier, it doesn't mean at all that you're over it, because I'm never over it. I'm going to miss Andy every day for the rest of my life. If I could trade my improved abilities of being a pediatrician and my compassion increase, I would trade it 100% and have my Andy back. There's no question in my mind. I would do it, but I can't. And so the big thing is, since it has to be this way, this is what I will do. Right? I can't take it back. I can't have him back. But since this is the way it has to be, I need to make the best of it. I need to be able to help people as best as I can, whether that be at work or, doing the podcast or wherever. So, yeah, I got to speak to a group of attorneys via Zoom a few weeks ago. I've spoken to a med school class that were going into their third year of med school, and I got the most positive feedback from them. They, after you're done with your second year, oftentimes you're pretty disillusioned and you just feel like, why am I doing this? And so I had such nice just emails from people saying, I was worried I was in the wrong field, and now you made me see that there's a place for me here too. So that's nice, because we can't throw out our humanity when we become a doctor.
No, and I remember med school, there's a place where you start to feel that. It's just like they're trying to beat the humanity out of me. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's...
And I think that often is right from there. Those third-year medical students, they really just seem to beat down.
Mm-hmm.
Especially a third-year medical student in a pandemic. They were not in a good place emotionally.
Can't imagine.
No, not at all. So my takeaway, there's a lot, but this less talking and more mowing, like that, just that vision of somebody just doing a silent act of service, is because I'm a talker. So that really hits me, is, advice and stuff you say, when really just some of these silent acts of service, a hug, a smile, all sorts of different things, are way more powerful than we could ever imagine.
I think as physicians, we're trained to be fixers, right? For the most part, we're trained to fix it, diagnose it, fix it, and then here's the plan. And I know for at least the physician side of things, with this, you're not there to fix anything. You're there to walk waist deep in the humanity, so to speak. And
I think too, I've learned so much from interviewing other parents who've gone through like those long protracted illnesses that have spent tons of time in the hospital. And I have learned so much, some of the mistakes physicians make there on, we can do this and we can do this and we can do this and we can do this. And I remember that. And I remember that you say that, all of that. And then behind closed doors, when the families aren't around, you say, yeah, but we shouldn't be doing any of it. And you need to say that to a family, because I feel so bad for some of these parents who have had to go in and say, stop doing CPR on my kid. Because do you know how hard that would be? And I recently had somebody on that the doctor came in, the doctor had been out and they were doing CPR on her child, and he came in and he said, I think it's time to stop now, okay? And she said, okay. And how much easier was that for her to say? For her to say, okay, than the woman that had to come in and say, stop. Like, that's a lot to put on a family. So when you can softly say, this is the right thing to do right now, okay? That is so much easier. And what a blessing that is to a family, to have people that walked with them, are there with them. And I know, as a pediatrician, you do not ever want to let a kid die. You just go and you go and you go till long after you should have stopped. You keep going. And I know it's like that even more with kids than it is with adults. But anyway, we are taught in general to keep going. And sometimes you need to say, okay, I know it's time to stop. I need to be the one to be with this family and say, it's time to stop now.
Yeah.
Because making them make the decision is, I don't know.
No,
It really sits worse with me now.
That's just not right.
No, that's really true, though. It's like I've had these conversations with parents going, with, unruly teenagers or whatever, where I say, unfortunately, there needs to be an adult in this situation, and that's you. And, in these situations, it's like, you're the medical professional.
Yeah.
I'm the doctor. Someone needs to be the doctor in this situation, so I'll be the doctor. And I think sometimes we get confused with this, paternalism and all the rest of it. Well, sometimes that's not paternalistic. That's just speaking the truth, and the lines get blurred.
And that soft way that he did it to be
yeah.
able to say, I think it's time to stop now. Okay. It still put a little bit of that on them to not say, we're going to stop to the family.
Right.
Because if that had been, we're stopping, then that mom would have said, no, don't stop. Keep going. But if you do, we're going to stop now. Okay. Then you don't have that defensiveness attacking, because he just said it as a we as a team, you included, are going to stop now. So you did it together.
Exactly.
See how that wording was so important?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's still shared.
It's caring. It's like I'm leading, but it's a shared decision.
It's still shared
it's
decision
a hard
making.
Decision.
Which is I think is critical. I mean, people.
Yeah.
We want people to take a bigger role in their health, and so, but obviously they're coming to us because we're experts. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't see us.
Right. But when you say we can do, give all of these million options, knowing that all of them are bad options, that's tough. I mean, that's tough to put on a family. And I know you want to, because you want to tell them everything, but you also sometimes need to say, but it's okay not to. We can do this, and we can do this, and we can do this, but it's okay not to do any of them. That's okay too.
Yeah, I think giving that false hope is just as bad. I mean, in the end, you want to give them hope if there is, but when you're just leading them along, that's just to me much worse.
I mean, that's cruel.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it really is. Like, you look at some of these chemotherapy agents that may end up being, amazing drugs at some point, but they're advertising 90 days of extended, survival with end-stage lung cancer. I mean, that's not extending someone's life. That's extending their dying process. That's just extending their palliative care, and you sit there and, we're going to do an episode on that because it's so ridiculous, but it's the same thing. It's like,
well, I told you my mother died when I was in college. She died of breast cancer, but she didn't die of breast cancer. She died of chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. She died because she went into heart failure, and she basically needed a heart transplant, but she was dying of metastatic
all
cancer.
The side effects of the
she's not going to qualify for a heart, obviously, but they, like, her oncologists were not going to let her die of cancer. Gosh darn it. There's no way this woman's dying of cancer. So they attack and attack and attack to the point where her body can't take it anymore. Anyway, so
no, and that's why the world always still needs general, like, we're generalists. We, and it's fascinating to me. I always, sarcasm is my love language, but I always used to say, I'd see these patients come in and they're 92 years old with a walker, and they saw the cardiologist, and they're on, Coumadin and Plavix, because, obviously, as long as they don't die from a cardiac event, then the cardiologist still wins. Even though they're a super high risk for a fall, and barely bumping their head would be an absolutely catastrophic event.
Yeah.
They're not going into the cardiology total.
No, of course not. It's
They're,
like,
they're
let
going into the
something else
cerebral
happen.
hemorrhage
Exactly.
total.
Or the
So that's
nephrology
okay.
pile, yeah.
You know,
Well,
and I look at
That's
you know,
like with Eric being an anesthesiologist. Do you know the surgeons that what they try to bring to the OR at times?
Oh, I know.
Like,
You're like, what are
okay,
you doing?
We could try to fix her hip, but you're going to kill her if you do. So, yeah.
Right.
Oh, my gosh.
No, it really is amazing. Like the Gestalt. Like my dad had he was on, I don't know, some cholesterol pill, and he was getting all the myalgias, and I'm like, why are you taking this? Like, you're 87 years old and you can't walk from the medication. What are you trying to prevent? Like, you know, like maybe it will decrease your risk of a stroke slightly, but like there's nothing left to prevent. Like, you know, just decrease the dose.
Exactly.
And,
Yeah,
you know, it's wild. Well, we could go down bunny trails, but this was absolutely spectacular, and I know it's going to be very, very helpful to our physician listeners and our non-physician listeners as well.
Well, and like I said, I am more than willing to speak to different groups, and I really would like to expand and talk to more medical groups. I think I will be able to do that locally here as the pandemic restrictions lift, but I just feel called to do that now too, and try to just help the physician community. So I appreciate this platform from you.
Well, and then I'm thinking, man, with Zoom now, you can speak all over the place with the everybody utilizing it this past 2 years. So thank you again so much for being here, sharing your heart, your story.
Wow. I learned a lot. We've had some pretty significant losses in our life in the last year, and, you know, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. And the way she was able to really paint the word picture of what that's like and how an outsider should respond to somebody who has had loss, I think is tremendously powerful. I found that, you know, really mind-blowing, especially with, you know, the encounters and the, you know, the stuff that we've had in our lives in the last year. It just really moving, really powerful, and what an amazing woman.
Yeah, what she's doing is totally incredible, and what a wonderful thing to share. I mean, whether you're somebody who's gone through grief like that, trying to help others through it in your family, friends, but if you're a medical professional and are trying to comfort patients and family members, it's all such wonderful advice. I mean, everybody listening is going to take something away from that. If you haven't like filled a bunch of Kleenex through the story of this whole thing already, I mean, it's just incredible. So
right. Well, and you know, there's a take-home message, which is like a real bottom line thing. If you don't know what to say, it's okay to say, I have no words, but I love you. That's enough.
That's it in a nutshell. So remember, you can find Marcy at her wonderful podcast called Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. And she also has a website, andysmom.com, and that's Andy with the Y, ANDYSMOM.com. She's on Facebook with Always Andy's Mom, Instagram, and Twitter, and I'll link those in the show notes for you as well. And one last thing before we go, remember Advice Media. Don't forget to schedule a consult with them to receive a $60 gift card and strategic insight on what your current digital marketing is doing or not doing for you. Contact Advice Media at drpodcastnetwork.com/Advice Media. Again, drpodcastnetwork.com/Advice Media.
Fantastic. We shall see you all next week.
See you next time.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit, uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
Oh, we've tried
try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.